Hi, I'm Glenda Morgan, and I work with a small company called Phil Hill and Associates. Yesterday I introduced myself that way, and they said small but mighty. So I'm from the small but mighty Phil Hill and Associates, and we're still waiting on one person. But what we're here to do is to discuss whether the sun is rising or setting on online learning. And could you pull up the slide here? I think the origin of this panel lies in a post that I wrote my colleague Phil and I, we write a newsletter called On Ed Tech. And I wrote a post a few months ago called, Online is the Target. And it came in part from looking about what's going on in the US with online learning right now, and saying that the proximal goal was not about online program managers or those sorts of things, but rather about online learning itself. There seems to be a hostility out there on the part of some towards online learning, and I was concerned about that. So we thought it would be good to have a broader discussion. Is the sun rising, or is it setting with online learning? And you've got a couple of different options here that my colleague Phil came up with here. There's one option where the sun is setting, things go down after the pandemic and never quite recover. There's another option where online continues to grow into the future. And which of those are we in? And we're going to discuss that at the moment. Could we have the next slide, please? And you've got a classic, as I call them, philistration here. Phil is well known for his pictures here, but you've got a picture of the kind of headwinds that online learning is flying into. So this is definitely the negative kind of approach, but perhaps we're going to have a more positive approach as we sort of go forward. And to discuss that, we've got a panel here. We should have another person, but we're hoping he's going to show up. I'm going to pass. I'm going to pass the mic on to my panelists to do a little introduction of themselves.
Thanks, Morgan. Kemi, Jona, newly arrived Vice Provost for Online Education and Digital Innovation at University of Virginia, and really exciting to be part of this esteemed group.
Okay.
I'm Joel Podolny, CEO of Honor Education. Before Honor, I ran something called Apple University at Apple, and before that I was Dean at the Yale School of Management and a professor. Sociology is my background.
Okay.
And this is John Katzman.
Yes.
Who's unusually quiet today.
Yes. I spent the last 3 weeks worrying about how I was going to limit John's comments. I was going to threaten that I had a black belt in Kung Fu, and then I thought that was not going to be believable. So instead I was going to threaten to do interpretive dance about his comments while he made them, but perhaps he heard that threat. That's why he's not here. But let's start with Kemi. Kemi, do you think the sun is rising or setting?
Well, yeah, I've spent weeks contemplating what this would be through the eclipse, and I was thinking, well, that's not exactly right either. I think, Morgan, I think my answer is supernova. And the reason I say that is I think we're in a very unique and unusual moment in history of higher ed generally, right? And I don't know, you've got it on the airline. I don't know if you've got like the door panel blowing off of the airline, but
don't give Phil ideas.
Yeah, is it? But I think these are things we're all aware of, right? We've got mostly on the picture there. We've got the demographic cliff that we all know about, which of course by itself has nothing to do with online per se, but what I am worried about is the financial pressures that these schools are facing, the ones that are particularly going to be impacted. Now obviously combined with the regulatory environment, and then of course FAFSA, which we're all kind of came out of nowhere. We thought it was bad enough, and now we've got that. But And clearly online is, I think, seen as really the only option for a lot of schools to try to do to diversify their revenue and try to kind of stay afloat. And so it sort of logically makes sense that we may see a lot of schools piling into the online space. You know, you could say what there's good reasons, bad reasons, but whatever the reason is, I think it could go supernova. And then we get sort of a mass onslaught, sort of serial effect of sort of commodity programs all competing with each other. So, I mean, imagine, I don't know, 2x, 3x, 5x the number of programs that we see today. And then what does that environment competitively mean for all the rest of us? Some of us who are already doing great work online, but now we have 5x the number of competitors. And so I think we're going to see kind of a supernova and then maybe a sort of a collapse afterwards. Not to zero necessarily, but a contraction. So that's kind of the alternative to rising or setting.
I shouldn't put it past Kemi to come up with a different way of thinking about it. So I'm not disappointed. What about you, Joel?
I think without a doubt, and I mean, the demand is without a doubt going to be there. I mean, you look on the learner side at just how many individuals are, you know, looking for education in a way that's going to be more woven into their lives. And the only way to kind of reach them in their lives is going to be online. So I think if the sun's setting, the sun may be setting on what were the early pedagogies that were associated with online, you know, whether or not MOOCs or kind of a chalk and talk, you know, sort of replication of experience. I mean, that the sun may be setting on that. The sun may be setting on some of the original business models that were associated with online. But in terms of the opportunities for learning that people are going to be looking for, I mean, as you said, this is, I think, where the demand is going to be.
And I sort of am frustrated by the depth of your responses, because it ixnays my next kind of comment here. You know, I went to a wonderful panel yesterday by ASU about the Sintana collaboration. And there was a gentleman on there from a university in Kosovo, and he said the problem is in so much of the discussion here from the US that it's so US-centric. And I think, you know, a lot of, for example, you know, the picture I just showed was a bit US-centric in terms of some of the headwinds and things like that. So thinking globally, you know, I think, do you have anything to add to what you just said in terms of what the shape of online is going to be like? You know, is the supernova idea going to take off globally as well?
Yeah, I think that the supernova, I think, was, again, very US-centric, given the diagram you've got up there, the illustration. But no, I think, to Joel's point, I think globally the demand is exploding, right? If you think about Africa, Asia, those kind of markets, I think we're really seeing that growth. And not many U.S. schools, I think, have really tapped into that in a meaningful way. And we have a lot of challenges around price point and modalities of access. As you said, these sort of traditional models don't always work. So I think globally, you know, absolutely, we're well positioned, but the demand is there. But I don't know if we're quite ready to meet it with the supply.
Yeah, I think you know, the thing I would add globally is, if you look at the infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, I mean, clearly it's expanding. And when you look at the devices that people use for learning, you know, it obviously is going to lean more towards a reliance, I think, on people's mobile device as being the fundamental way in which they're learning. And I think in the U.S. we've assumed laptop, computer screen is how people are taking in. And so I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to think about when we shift to more of a global perspective, is assume the person's learning on a phone. How does that change how you would develop course, how you would offer? But with that added in, I think, yeah, the demand is huge.
And Joel, I want to follow up with you, because in your previous answer, you said something really intriguing. You said that the sun may be setting on some of the business models that we have now. Mm-hmm. Can you expand a little bit on that? You know, which ones, and what do you think comes in place of those?
Yeah, so I'll take those as two separate questions. I mean, I think it's setting on, you know, a model. I mean, one of the things about COVID, I think, you know, a lot of things we're still living with in a negative sense, but I think one of the silver linings was it developed universities' capacities around a number of the aspects of online learning that previously they had been outsourcing because they had for their core programs. And so I think that moves away from...
Paging Mr. Katzman. Paging
better
Mr.
late than
Katzman. Never. Were you in line?
I feel so much better now.
So I think that moves us away from, you know, the models of revenue share across the full range of services when the universities don't necessarily need all the services, long-range contracts or long-term contracts. I think we're going to definitely be moving away from that. And I think we're going to be moving much more probably towards, you know, a model of it's going to be based on the enrollment around the particular program, that what you pay for is actually where the students are engaging. Because if the university is actually not getting sort of the revenue and the growth, then as you said, like, they're not going to have the resources. So
let's hold that thought and let John do a quick introduction to himself.
I'll keep my introduction to I'm so sorry. It's in my book for an hour from now. John Katzman, I founded a series of ed tech companies, Princeton Review, and then 2U, and now Noodle. And it's good to be here.
Thank you, John. And we were very glad to see you. So thank you. So we're talking about different kinds of business models, and Joel just sort of talked about, you know, seeing a broader spectrum. My sort of question was getting at more, maybe it's just what will the shape of online learning look like, in a sense? Is everybody going to be doing it, or are you going to, somebody in a meeting this morning earlier said it's going to be sort of barbell shaped. You know, you'll get some places that are really big that specialize it, you'll get most maybe not doing it, and then some that are really sort of specializing it and maybe growing. What do you think that the shape of online will look like? Will it be, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats, to add another metaphor, or what do you think it'll look like? Perhaps let's start with Kemi and then go to John and Joel.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, at least if we're talking about the U.S., the higher ed sector is incredibly heterogeneous, right? I mean, what is it, 3,000, 4,000 institutions, lots of different models and sort of service priorities. So it's hard to say, I would say definitively, what it is. I do agree with Joel that I think we're at a sort of evolutionary point post-COVID where it has become much more accepted. I think the chart that you put up earlier indicated, you know, that over half of the undergrads, right, are doing at least one online course, right? So it's like the new majority normal model, not kind of like this little kind of niche activity. So in that sense, I think, you know, it has gained kind of broader acceptance. The world did not end, you know, for higher ed during COVID. But I think, you know, as I think about it and as I take on a new role and I look around, I see some colleagues who've also moved into kind of new roles. You know, the answer is how is online advancing your institution strategy, right, and your brand? You know, does everybody need to look like Southern New Hampshire or ASU or WGU? No. And you probably couldn't if you tried anymore, not easily. And so I think it's a tough question to kind of give you a blanket answer, but I think everyone has to kind of lean into their lane and think about how does this move us forward strategically, serving the populations. If you're a state institution, then you've got priorities around that. So that's kind of how I think about it.
What about you, Joel? What do you think the future will look like?
I start with the Apple Store. and I've talked about this with a couple of people here, that when Apple first came out with them, you thought it was a showroom. And, you know, that's adorable. And they're the highest grossing stores per square foot by a lot. Tiffany, I think, is number 2, and nobody else is close. Because they were conceptualized as a part of your life. You do these things remotely on your computer, on the web. You do these. When you come into the store, you're coming in for a reason. And the whole thing kind of makes sense. It hangs together. And 70% of online learners live within 50 miles of campus. So the question really is, don't think about hybrid. Just think about agile. Like, there's a campus, and students are studying something. And some of them are adults, and some of them are traditional college goers. What do they do online, and what do they do on campus? When are they here? When are they there? How do you market that? How do you serve those students in the most efficient way that is indifferent as to modality? And how do you use your campus like an Apple store and not just say, well, I want students on campus, so you got to do this thing that you could have done online, except in a classroom?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. So a deliberately appropriate usage of a medium to really benefit the thing. What about you, Joel?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with John's agility point. Appreciate the reference to the Apple Store. The thing, though, that I guess I would add, I had an interesting conversation with somebody who ran executive education for one of the major business schools. They'd had and he was sharing the results of a consulting study that had been done when this individual and his peers were interviewed. Who is your competition for the online programs? 80% of what they identified were other executive programs at other business schools. They then went to the participants in those programs and they asked, when you were considering, what did you consider? And only 20% of what was considered were other business schools, right? They were professional associations in what they were offering. They were nonprofit, NGOs who were offering programs. They were things that their companies were providing for them. And to me, that was, it's not like it was a shock, but it sort of showed if 80% of what they're thinking about is kind of outside, that's one of the other boundaries that's going to start to go away, is the boundary between university and not, in terms of how people are thinking about driving their learning going forward.
So the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train, to use another transportation metaphor.
Or the opportunity is to kind of reach people in all these different parts of their lives, right? We just need to figure out how to hop onto the train as it's coming at us.
Well, we've got more than half the content on Coursera is from non-academic partners, so I don't think that's an outlier figure that you're quoting, right?
That's interesting.
Yes, and just to add another data point there, I think Georgia Tech did a study, and a vast majority of the people in their online masters in computer science, if they didn't get in there, they weren't going to go anywhere, or they weren't at least going to go to another university. So it was there, or that particular modality, or bust.
I don't think this is a train. This is a real opportunity. The number of students getting their graduate degree or undergraduate is up, not down. And people keep, for the last 20 years, the end is nigh for degrees, and the gap between people with degrees and not continues to go up, not down. There's the lifelong learning market for professionals is now larger than the market for graduate school programs, and higher ed has a tiny little market share. So for me, what we have in higher ed, we're going to keep, and what everybody else has is fair game. I think this is much more upside than down.
What's your take on the Accenture acquisition of Udacity, and whether if that's replicated 2 or 3 times by other Fortune 500 firms, are we going to see a future where some of those firms just say, we'll just take you right out of high school because we don't need the higher ed pathway?
You guys know these numbers as well as I do. Google says you no longer need a degree. The actual numbers, 1 out of 7,000 hired don't have a bachelor's. Like, this is just hype. This is like years ago people talking about badges. Like, we move on.
We don't need those stinking.
Exactly. I mean, the Accenture acquisition is about lowering their cost of creating better consultants in areas that are changing very quickly. Again, that's not replacing people getting a bachelor's or a master's. It's replacing people doing professional development from for-profits, in that case, Udacity, with a different for-profit. They're seeing it as an internal cost savings.
And I still have whiplash
for now.
From Kemi's change in direction here. So once I get sorted here, one thing I want to bring us back. I think John is absolutely right. We have an expansion of opportunity here, and that there really is a lot of upside. But for the moment, at least in higher ed, we're facing a situation where some of the people doing online learning get outcomes that maybe aren't as great, in part because they're coming in, slightly less prepared than some others. They have a lot going on in their lives. They're working, they're raising families and things like that. And so I think that's driving some of the discussion around predatory online learning that gave rise to some of my original kind of post here. How do we address that? How do we fix that? What can we do to make it better?
I mean, your point is really well taken, right? Which is, and you open by saying that online is the target, right? And people who want to use those differential outcomes as an excuse to go after the modality without asking those hard questions about, are you serving a higher need population? I think HBCUs also got thrown under the bus for exactly the same reason until people began to educate themselves around that we're not talking about the same baseline, right? And we need to be more nuanced. So I think it's a convenient boogeyman to go after. But I think as a field, I think some of the work that John and his partners and others in the room have really leaned into serving the adult learner, who is now the majority learner, as John was saying. And I think we're getting a lot better. We're developing more flexible models. Not everybody's there yet, but I think we've made a lot of progress in general over time, and it's on us if we can't adapt to that reality, and it's our game to lose, as John was saying.
I think there's demand, right, for education as vaccination, right? Like, just give me the shot.
Just in case.
Right?
Yeah.
And because there's demand for it, some people will try to present a program in that form. Anybody who's been an educator knows that doesn't work, right? Like, anybody who's been an educator knows that, the idea of sort of passive learning, passive consumption, it doesn't work. Like that the core of a great learning experience is human connection, and if we kind of make that central in online, the way we've at least held out as being the most impactful, transformative pedagogy in person, and then think about how can digital uniquely enhance that. Like, I think there's absolutely no reason why that sort of the past has to be the future. I'm sure 50 years from now there will still be people asking though for the vaccination, and there will still be some who will be trying to tell them we can give that to you. But we know that's not the case.
John?
There are two models for online. One of them is, this is as good, as selective as everything, as much student-faculty engagement as our classroom program. Right? We're holding ourselves to the same standards. We're probably charging the same tuition. If you're going down that road, the move to agility is relatively straightforward because the two things are in parallel. They're different, and there's strengths and weaknesses of each, but they're in parallel. And the other model is a MOOC on steroids. Way less expensive, probably open admissions. That model is now a decade old plus. We should have numbers on if it works. What's the ROI? And not just immediately out of school, but 5 years down the line, because that's what higher ed is playing for, is 5 or 10 years down the line. The fact that we don't have any numbers on that model is because the numbers are terrible, right? These are all people who are math literate and who are certainly capable of tracking these things, and if there were good numbers, we would be hearing them. So I'm a skeptic on that model, and I will be until I see data that says that is really higher education. In the first model, we can evaluate the online versus on ground at the same schools. Are the standards the same, and are the outcomes the same? Because the modality certainly supports quality, and somebody who's checking the box should be outed pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. But are those really the only two models? Are we not going to see some other kinds of models? I'm thinking even of already an old model like the Minerva kind of model. What other kinds of models might we see there that the technology allows for? And that's a tough question, because otherwise we'd be running off and creating those models. But
yeah, I mean, I had that, and I don't know how many people went to the air show, but I had some similar reaction, which is just incredible generativity, creativity, lots of, brand new startups less than a year old, building on APIs that didn't exist 18 months ago, right? Mm-hmm. But to me, they all have to sell into the current system, because they're all, for-profit, venture-backed, whatever it is, which means by definition, they're sort of sustaining innovations, right? Because you can't really be disruptive and try to sell tomorrow into the system that's mm-hmm. your customer. And I worry that we're kind of blocked in higher ed in the same way, which is we've got layer after layer of both internal governance and regulatory, and then certainly plenty of external governance and regulatory, not to mention all the kind of uncertain regulatory stuff that we're dealing with today. It's very, very antithetical to innovation. It doesn't mean it's impossible, and there's certainly great examples, and a lot of people in this room are doing that. But and Minerva is certainly one of those kind of success stories where they really kind of took a crack at doing something that's pretty new. But it's no slam dunk, right? And I think we're kind of treading uphill pretty hard on some of those more disruptive innovation versus sustaining innovation models.
So maybe the sun isn't setting on online learning. Maybe the sun is just setting on online learning in higher education in universities. Maybe that's it.
There are no metrics that says that the sun's setting at all, right? There are more and more students, 80, 90% undergraduate and graduate, are taking some online. Mm-hmm. But to your earlier point, there really are only two models. One is the intent to be as good or better than what we've been doing on campus, mm-hmm. which probably involves a lot of student-faculty interaction, which probably means that it's not a hell of a lot less expensive, mm-hmm. and a model that it's more like a book or a movie.
Or the gym versus the personal trainer.
Or gym versus personal trainer. And it's either you're trying to get to the same outcomes, mm-hmm. or you're just trying to give something that's relatively inexpensive. And I'm at the point that somebody comes up with something that is as engaging and as long-term effective in changing your life, but costs $20 and involves just putting a helmet on for 30 seconds, then higher ed has a problem.
Okay, but until then
I'm not worried.
Yeah. Joel, we haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, when you were asking before about kind of I mean, I think under the term agile, there's a lot of possibilities, right? In terms of models, in terms of what fraction of time is on campus versus off. I mean, and in fact, there's more possibilities, I think, now for different models. And I'm not even sure that the innovation that happens today, I think it's true given the way degree programs, the governance around degree programs, the possibility for experimenting is harder. But I think there's so much growth opportunity in the credentialed space to then provide the initial guidance for the degree programs. That, I mean, that feels to me like how the innovation can happen. I mean, my one worry, honestly, just because we started talking about AI, you know, my one worry is, as we're finally coming back to what we said, that, you know, kind of human connection is kind of what's critical for, you know, really transformational learning, like that. There's just that all of a sudden AI is going to have us going down the MOOC path again, where it's like, well, if you can interact with your bot, you don't need to interact with people, as opposed to how do we have AI sort of support and enhance the engagement of individuals with one another, right? Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm also wondering, to the chart that you and Phil did, where over half the students are now taking at least one online course, you know, maybe the title of the session around online higher ed goes away. Because, like, you know, now when you go buy something, you just either go to Amazon or Wayfair or whatever, you go to the store, you're just like, I'm just buying something. I'm not thinking of myself as doing e-commerce versus, you know, store commerce. I'm just buying, right? And I wonder if we're going to kind of ease our way now into, since we're at, what, 54% or whatever, if it's just sort of like I'm just learning, and sometimes I want to be online and sometimes I don't, or because there's good reason, you know, if I'm in a nursing program or whatever. So we could see that evolution where it's just not a separate thing. It's just
so it's a
learning.
definitional issue.
Well,
yeah,
it
we're
could
just
be
learning.
that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that we haven't really unpacked since COVID is the different preferences of students, of learners, of faculty, and of administrators. And, you know, I'm aware of several surveys that were done about preferences afterwards that got buried because it was counter-narrative to schools wanting to be reopened and getting students back on campus. But I think the reality is that students do want that optionality, and that creates conundrums for the traditional on-campus programs, and what are you going to do with all this real estate in these buildings and things like that. So I don't think we're done sorting out the different preferences of the different stakeholders involved here yet. More.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's true. But how do we build that new future of the online? You know, how do we make, you know, in some ways what we're seeing is people are fighting the fights of 15 years ago right now in policy and in regulation and things like that. You know, when online learning was sort of struggling and coming out, and some bad things happened. And right now we're seeing some of the results of that. But we're facing a future. How do we build that future of online?
I'd follow the money.
Yeah.
So the cost of teaching has been flat to inflation, as has higher ed tuition overall, for like 20 plus years. The cost of student services and academic support has tripled after inflation and is now more expensive at most schools than the cost of teaching. Where AI and technology can make teaching better, but not less expensive because it's the human interactions that we're trying to optimize, it can really lower the cost of administration. So the way I'd start is by aggressively looking at the infrastructure of higher ed, at the way we do financial aid, at the way we do advisement, at the way we do admissions, and right through all of the services, and say, how do we get back, first of all, to 2005 in terms of our cost structure, but second, how do we make those systems agile so that they work perfectly for online students, on-ground students, hybrid, or anybody else? And if we build out that infrastructure, and if we start really addressing the cost disease of higher ed, where it really is, which is in that area,
student services.
We're going to be ready for technology affecting instruction in a completely different way.
Okay, interesting. Any comments on that? Or?
Yeah, Marshall McLuhan's got this great line, we march backwards into the future when it comes to innovation, right? That the first instantiations of any innovation bear too much of a resemblance, to what went before, right? First smartphones just look like a shrunk computer, right? And it takes a while to sort of okay, what is it to sort of march forwards into the future? I think we've got to give up a little on the metaphor of a physical class as being the way in which engagement happens at scale and online, or we're going to keep having the physical class be the best we could ever achieve, right? It would be like if our social network apps on the phone all of a sudden said, okay, we'll just have names on little dots and we'll have them in a room, and if you want to talk to somebody, we'll put those dots together, right? That's kind of what we've been doing when we're trying to kind of bring...
So enough skeuomorphism.
Yeah, enough skeuomorphism. Yeah, enough skeuomorphism.
Yeah. We're starting to run out of time, and I want to steal an idea from the previous session I was in, where the moderator said, what have you learned at this conference? And it would be cool if you reference somebody else that has really shaped your thinking about this issue. Any takers first?
So,
go, Joel.
No, why did I talk? No, I wanted clarification on the question.
He has a background in academia.
Clarification on the question. When you say this issue...
So the expansion or not of online learning.
Well,
I'll go first then while you all think. So, and it's not actually from this conference, so I'm going to break my rule, but I hope that we're seeing a growth of online learning. My first teaching job was at the University of South Africa, and it was a correspondence university, and we used to send papers to people, and they would send us back, and I used to get papers with candle wax on them. And that has forever shaped my thinking about online learning, because we were bringing learning to people, often in prison and places like that, who couldn't do it. So final comments.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go back to kind of the experience I had at the air show with just the sort of explosion, the sort of Cambrian explosion of sort of generative AI. And it made me actually wonder whether, because of the richness of the data that exists when you're interacting online versus in a traditional classroom, to your point, whether the pendulum might swing, given the power of generative AI to sort of harvest that data and then turn it, hopefully, to good use, as John was alluding to, might start shifting the center of gravity more in that direction because of the power of these new tools that are now just coming online, of which we're just getting a glimpse this year. I mean, who knows what it will look like next year when we're here. And so I just wonder whether the data is the new oil kind of metaphor is really going to start taking root and causing us to really appreciate the richness of those data, the data exhaust that can be turned into a net positive in an online or in a hybrid.
John, you have the final last word.
Oh, awesome. I've met with a couple people who are really at the edges of, on the one side, the connection between K-12 and higher ed, and on the other side, the connection between higher ed and work. And I think that online has already started messing with the lines in sort of a different and really interesting way. If it's Harrison Keller's work at University of Texas with high school science curricula from UT Austin, if it's the dual mission programs with the lines between 2- and 4-year schools, if it's every state dumbing down their teaching requirements because they can't find enough teachers, And so the need of an ed school to move from you're going to get trained to be a teacher and then teach to we're going to give you kind of enough to get you through the first semester and then keep working with you for the next 2 years. Like, there are a bunch of ways that I think online facilitates
So
a way to play.
boundaries are shifting, and online can help.
Or blurring more than shifting.
Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting one. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you all for coming
Thank
and
you,
staying.
Morgan.
And